When I turned 68, I moved into my son's house, thinking I'd finally be surrounded by family again. I brought my favorite tea set, the blanket my late husband and I used to share, and a heart full of hope. But one morning, while making breakfast, my grandson asked, "Grandma, who are you?" I smiled, ready to answer, but my son spoke first. "She's just staying here temporarily." I stood there, holding a cup that suddenly felt too heavy. What they didn't know was the house they were living in? I paid for it. And I was about to take it back. My name is Margaret, and for most of my life, I believed that family was everything. I was a teacher for 35 years, the kind who stayed after school to help the struggling kids, the kind who brought extra lunches in case someone forgot theirs. But at home, I was something else entirely. The glue that held everyone together. I remembered every birthday, hosted every Thanksgiving, and sent cards for no reason at all. After my husband passed away from a heart attack 11 years ago, I filled the silence with love, baking cookies for my neighbors, tutoring local kids, and calling my son Daniel every Sunday at 5 p.m. sharp. He always answered. Daniel was my only child. I raised him with everything I had, even when we had almost nothing. When his father died, Daniel had just graduated college. I remember holding him at the funeral, promising him we'd be okay. He was always a good boy, quiet, focused, a bit shy, but with a heart as big as the sky. He got a job in tech, then married a woman named Amanda. They had a son, Eli. I visited every few weeks, always careful not to overstay. Amanda seemed pleasant, though reserved, and their home was beautiful. 3 bedrooms, a backyard, and soft gray walls that made the whole place feel like a Pinterest dream. I never wanted to be a burden. That was my deepest fear. So when I slipped outside my apartment complex one winter morning and bruised my knee badly enough that I needed a cane, I didn't tell Daniel right away, but he found out. He always found out. And 2 days later, he drove down, packed up my apartment himself, and said, "Mom, come stay with us, please. We've got space. Eli will love having you around." I hesitated. I really did. I said, "Only if it's truly okay with Amanda." He smiled and said, "She's the one who suggested it." I cried that night. Not because I was sad, because I felt loved. It felt like life was giving me a second chance to be surrounded by the warmth of a family again. We packed my things, my photos, my books, the yellow teapot Daniel gave me for my 60th birthday, my late husband's sweater. I brought my old recipes too. Banana bread, chicken pot pie, my famous buttermilk pancakes. I imagined making Sunday breakfast for everyone. I imagined reading Eli bedtime stories. I imagined not being alone. They gave me the upstairs room, on a cozy space with slanted ceilings and one window that overlooked the backyard. Daniel carried my boxes up, joking, "You get the tower suite, Mom." Amanda even placed a small lavender candle on the nightstand. It smelled like peace. The first week was lovely. Eli would run into my room every morning yelling, "Grandma!" We played board games. I helped Amanda fold laundry. Daniel came home early just to have dinner with us. For the first time in years, I felt needed. I felt like I belonged. There was laughter in the house, warmth in the air. I knew Amanda and I weren't best friends, but we were cordial, respectful. I stayed out of her way, offered help, and never interfered with parenting decisions. I cleaned up after myself, kept quiet during her work Zoom calls, and always asked before using the kitchen. I even made a little schedule to be respectful of their routine. It wasn't my house, after all. I was just grateful to be there. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. Looking back now, I realized there were little signs. Amanda rarely looked me in the eye when we spoke. Sometimes I'd find my teacups moved out of the cabinet, tucked away in a box labeled extra. I once overheard her telling a friend on the phone, "It's just temporary, until she's back on her feet." At the time, I brushed it off. She probably didn't mean anything by it, or maybe she did, but I wasn't ready to think that way. I wanted this to work. I wanted to believe that Daniel meant what he said when he called me the most important person in his life. I held on to that phrase like a life raft. I repeated it to myself when I felt awkward opening the fridge. I repeated it when I walked quietly past their bedroom at night. I repeated it when Eli's drawings of family didn't include me, because I needed it to be true. I had given my life to this family. I thought I was coming home. The house Daniel and Amanda lived in looked like something out of a home magazine. Clean white siding, navy shutters, a wraparound porch with hanging flower baskets. It sat in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac where kids rode scooters and neighbors waved as they passed. It was the kind of place where everything looked perfect from the outside, and for a while, I believed it truly was. Daniel had done well for himself. He worked for a reputable software company, mostly from home. His office was downstairs, right off the foyer, where he kept dual monitors, noise-canceling headphones, and a small espresso machine. Amanda worked 3 days a week at a nonprofit. She was efficient, organized, and carried a constant air of calm control, like someone who always had a to-do list running silently in her mind. Their son, Eli, was a bright spark. 4 years old with a gap-toothed grin and endless questions. He liked dinosaurs, peanut butter sandwiches without the crust, and climbing anything taller than him. I adored him from the moment I saw him. He called me Grandma Maggie and would run into my room with storybooks, toy trucks, or just to show me how high he could jump. His joy was infectious. Daniel had changed since becoming a father. He was more tired, more serious, but still my sweet boy. He kissed Amanda on the cheek every morning, made Eli's lunchbox notes with little doodles, and asked me how I was settling in every evening. "You okay up there, Mom?" he'd say from the bottom of the stairs. I always said yes. I meant it, at first. Amanda, she was polite, not cold, not rude, just distant. She'd ask if I needed anything, thanked me when I did the dishes, smiled when I offered to help with dinner. But her eyes never lingered on mine. When we sat together, it felt like being in a waiting room, not a living room. Still, I tried to connect. I complimented her cooking, folded laundry beside her, asked about her job. She answered briefly, then turned back to her laptop. My room, the one Daniel called the Tower Suite, was warm and cozy, but undeniably removed. It was up a narrow staircase off the kitchen, technically part of the attic, renovated into a guest room. Slanted ceilings, a small dresser, one window facing the backyard. I didn't mind the climb or the size. I was just grateful. I added a few things to make it feel like mine. A framed photo of my husband, my favorite patchwork quilt, and a tiny cactus named Clyde. At first, there was peace. I woke up early, made coffee before Amanda came down, and left the kitchen spotless. I played with Eli, helped him practice his letters, baked banana muffins he insisted were magic. I felt useful again, not just tolerated, but needed. Amanda even let me pick up Eli from daycare once when she had a late meeting. It felt like trust. But small things began to shift. Not enough to call out. Just enough to notice. One morning, I found the bananas I'd bought for muffins replaced with a store-bought loaf and a sticky note. No need to bake, already covered. Another time, Amanda asked if I could try not to run the washer during the day because the noise carries into Daniel's calls. Then the laundry schedule was printed and taped near the machine. They weren't rules, not officially, just suggestions. There was a dinner one night. Eli's little friend and his parents were invited. I made my chicken pot pie, the one Daniel grew up loving. Everyone ate it, complimented it. But when Amanda shared the leftovers, she told them, "It's from a recipe blog I follow." I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But she didn't correct herself, just smiled and changed the subject. Still, I told myself not to overthink. She was probably just tired, or distracted, or trying to keep things smooth. I had lived long enough to know that not every slight was intentional, and some silences are just the noise of life. But part of me, a small, quiet voice, began to wonder if I was intruding, if my presence, no matter how careful, was making someone uncomfortable, And yet, when Daniel looked at me and said, "I'm so glad you're here, Mom," I chose to believe him. When Eli begged me to read just one more story before bed, I believed I was wanted. When Amanda thanked me for folding the towels, just the way she liked, I took it as kindness, because I needed to believe that this was still love, that this was still family. It started small, too small to name, too vague to accuse. A slightly tighter smile from Amanda when I stepped into the kitchen, a pause in her voice when I asked if I could bake something. One evening, I was slicing carrots for stew when she walked in, stopped mid-step and said, "Oh, I was just about to start dinner." I offered to help. She hesitated, then said, "Actually, can I just get the space for a bit? It helps me clear my head." I apologized and took my cutting board upstairs. The stew never got made that night. The next day, a note appeared on the fridge. "Let's try to keep the kitchen free between 5 p.m., 7 p.m. for meal prep." It was written in marker on a cute notepad shaped like a tomato, like it was just a cheerful little suggestion. Underneath, in smaller print, "Thanks for understanding." Then came the laundry issue. One Wednesday evening, I started a load at 6:15 p.m. By 6:20, Amanda was at my door, knocking softly. "Hey, sorry to bother you. Could we maybe not run the washer after 6? It's really loud in Daniel's office. He has a team call at 7. I nodded, embarrassed. After that, I started washing clothes at odd times. Early morning, mid-afternoon, when no one was home. Sometimes I skipped laundry altogether, wearing cardigans twice, even 3 times, to avoid becoming an inconvenience. One morning, Eli and I were playing with blocks when he asked, "Grandma, are you a guest?" I smiled, unsure how to respond. "Why do you ask that, sweetie?" he said. "Because Mommy said guests stay upstairs, and you're upstairs." The blocks suddenly looked like tombstones. That night, I lay awake for hours. I kept thinking of the word guest. A guest could be welcomed, yes, but a guest didn't belong. A guest didn't rearrange furniture or put family photos on the wall. A guest didn't stay forever, and a guest could be asked to leave. Still, I kept quiet. I told myself it was a phase. Amanda was probably overwhelmed. Maybe she didn't mean it like that. Maybe I was being sensitive. Then I started hearing things. Not often. Just fragments. Half conversations through thin walls. Once Amanda's voice from downstairs, sharp and low. "I know she means well, but this is our house. I need to feel like I have control in my own home." Daniel's reply was muffled, unsure. Another time, after dinner, I caught, "It's not forever, just until she's better. Then maybe we can figure something else out." Something else. I became hyper-aware of my presence, how loudly I walked, how long I sat in the living room, whether I was in the way. I stopped joining movie nights unless asked. I offered to cook less. I retreated into my little attic room more and more. I tried to shrink myself into gratitude. One afternoon, while dusting the windowsill, I overheard a budgeting conversation. Amanda had spreadsheets open. Daniel was typing. She said, "Groceries are up again. Utility bills, too. It's like everything jumped when she moved in." Daniel didn't respond immediately. Then, "She's only here for now. We'll figure it out." That word again. For now. I wasn't angry, not yet, just hollow. I replayed Daniel's words from the day he helped me move. "Mom, come stay with us, please. We've got space. Eli will love having you around." Oh, had he meant it? Did Amanda ever truly want me there? Or was it just easier to say yes than to say no? I began questioning everything, every smile, every kind gesture. Had Amanda placed that lavender candle out of genuine welcome or obligation? Did Daniel really want me there, or did he just feel guilty? I remembered when Daniel was 12 and broke his arm falling off his bike. I stayed up 3 nights straight on the hospital cot. I brought him pudding cups and read to him from his favorite fantasy books. When he turned 25 and got his first apartment, I helped him move with boxes labeled in my handwriting: kitchen stuff, winter clothes, books, read again. I never thought I'd be in a box, too. labeled temporary. The house, once warm, now felt colder. Not physically, but in all the ways that mattered. The silence between meals, the way Amanda no longer lingered in the same room, the way Daniel looked tired every time a conversation veered toward plans for the future. And yet, I stayed. Because I didn't want to believe the love I had poured into this family, decades of it, could evaporate so quietly. I wasn't ready to admit what I now knew deep down. I was no longer part of the structure. I was the shadow in the attic. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those slow, sunny days when everything feels slightly too bright. Amanda had invited 2 families from Eli's preschool over for a casual get-together. Finger foods, sparkling water, a few lawn games in the backyard. I spent the morning helping slice fruit and laying out the folding chairs, careful not to overstep. Amanda smiled when I brought out the pitcher of lemonade, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. The guests arrived just after 1. Parents in athleisure, kids in matching sun hats. Amanda was in full hostess mode, warm, organized, utterly composed. Daniel drifted between conversations, balancing a plate of crackers and his phone. I stayed mostly on the sidelines, chatting when approached, smiling when introduced. I didn't mind. I was happy to see Eli running with his friends, cheeks flushed, hair wild in the breeze. At one point, the kids settled in a circle under the patio umbrella, munching on string cheese and apple slices. I sat nearby on a deck chair, sipping lemonade. Eli wandered over, plopped beside me, and leaned against my leg. I brushed a leaf from his hair. He looked up at me, squinting from the sun. "Grandma," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "are you staying long?" It was such an innocent question. So casual, so full of childish curiosity. He didn't mean anything by it, but before I could answer, before I could even blink, Daniel replied from across the patio. "She's just here temporarily." His voice was light, almost cheerful, but it landed like a brick in my chest. Just here temporarily. The words hung in the air, sharp and awkward. The nearby conversation faltered. One of the mothers glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Someone coughed. Amanda kept pouring juice into tiny cups, her face unreadable. I smiled. I had to. I patted Eli's head, murmured something about being lucky to spend time with him. Then I stood up slowly, careful not to let my knees wobble, and walked back into the house. My hands were trembling. In the kitchen, I pretended to straighten a dish towel just to give them something to do. My heart thudded in my ears. I stared at the counter, at the spotless surfaces, the curated fruit bowl, the framed quote that read, "Home is where the heart is." I couldn't breathe. She's just here temporarily. Daniel hadn't even looked at me when he said it. He hadn't hesitated. He hadn't stumbled over the words. Just a simple, clean fact tossed into the middle of a Sunday barbecue like it was nothing. Maybe to him it was. Later, after the guests had gone and the backyard was littered with half-eaten popsicles and plastic cups, Amanda handed me a bag of leftovers. "If you want to take these up," she said, nodding toward the stairs. I nodded back, numb. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and listened. Through the thin ceiling, I could hear Daniel and Amanda's voices, low, urgent. I couldn't make out every word, but enough. "We need to talk about a timeline," Amanda said. "It's been 3 months. Daniel sighed. "I know, it's hard." Another pause. "It's not sustainable," she said. "We didn't agree to this long term." My chest tightened. I pressed a hand to it, surprised by the ache. I'd always thought heartbreak was dramatic. Something you saw in movies. But this? This was slow erosion. This was being whittled down by kindness that came with boundaries, by love that had an expiration date. The next morning, Eli came to my room, as he often did. He climbed into my lap and held up a picture he'd drawn. A house with a red roof, a sun in the corner, a stick figure family, Mommy, Daddy, Eli, and the dog. No grandma. He pointed to the house and said, "That's our forever home." I kissed the top of his head and smiled. Then I got up and closed the door softly behind him. I sat back down on the bed, alone, and stared at the picture in my hand. Temporary. I turned the word over and over in my mind. How easily it had been said. How deeply it cut. I thought about everything I had given. Not just the money, though there was that too, but the time, the years, the holidays hosted, the illnesses nursed, the calls at midnight, the endless love poured out without condition. And now I was a guest with an expiration date, a visitor in a home I had helped build. That night, for the first time, I didn't join dinner. I said I had a headache. I needed space, I said. Amanda nodded, almost relieved. I sat upstairs, listening to their laughter through the floor, and began to think about how much I still didn't know and what I needed to find out. That night, just after 10, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. A soft knock followed. 2 taps, then silence. I opened the door to find Amanda standing there, arms crossed gently over her chest, trying to smile in that practiced way she always did when delivering unpleasant news. "Hey," she said, barely above a whisper. "I hope I'm not waking you." I shook my head. "No, I'm up." She looked past me into the room, her eyes scanning the modest space, the stack of books beside the bed, my sewing kit on the dresser, the extra blanket folded at the foot. She cleared her throat. "I wanted to ask if, maybe, we could tidy up in here a bit, make some room. Eli's been needing more space to play and—" She hesitated. "You know how small this house can feel." I looked around. There wasn't much to begin with. A single twin bed, a narrow wardrobe, 1 shelf of family photo albums, a few keepsakes from my teaching days. I'd already minimized, already tucked away everything I could to stay invisible. Amanda added quickly, "Just some of the extra stuff. Boxes, craft things, whatever isn't essential." I nodded. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll take care of it." She lingered. Her hand brushed the doorframe. "Also," her voice lowered, "Daniel and I were talking. We think it might help Eli if we're all a bit more consistent with space. He's starting to ask questions about who belongs where. He's at that age, you know? Boundaries are important." I said nothing. She took my silence as permission. "Maybe if you're okay with it, we can start referring to this room as the guest room again, just for his understanding." She paused, then looked me in the eye, a flicker of discomfort in her gaze. "He needs to feel like this is his home, not a shared space with someone he doesn't fully understand." Someone he doesn't fully understand. Not your mother-in-law, not Eli's grandmother, just someone. She gave a soft "thank you" and walked back downstairs. I closed the door gently, then sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. My hand rested on my lap, fingers trembling slightly. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I was past that. What I felt now was something colder. A kind of quiet finality. A door that didn't slam but slowly clicked shut. I had become extra. Not part of the core unit. Not necessary. Just clutter. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling for hours. The hum of the house surrounded me. The creak of floorboards, the whir of the refrigerator below, Daniel's laugh filtering faintly through the vents. They sounded happy, normal. I didn't fit in that soundtrack anymore. The next morning, I started going through my things. I sorted books into boxes, folded my sweaters, removed framed photos from the wall. I placed my husband's sweater, the one I had brought with me as comfort, into a storage bin. As I worked, I kept thinking, if I vanished tomorrow, how long before anyone noticed? That afternoon, Daniel came upstairs to check on me. He leaned on the doorframe, looking tired. "Mom, Amanda said she talked to you." I nodded. "She's just trying to make things easier for Eli. It's not personal." "Of course it was, but I didn't say that." I just nodded again. "We love having you here," he added, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's just, space is tight, and you know how Amanda gets when things feel chaotic." "She likes order," I said, more to myself than him. He smiled weakly. "Yeah, that's all it is." He left soon after. I stood there in the quiet, surrounded by half-packed boxes and blank walls, and realized something sharp. They weren't preparing me to stay. They were preparing me to leave, slowly, politely, strategically, so that no one had to say the words out loud. And the worst part? I'd been helping them do it. I'd made myself smaller. I tiptoed around their lives, folded myself into corners, accepted every suggestion like it was a gift. I had erased pieces of myself to fit into a home I once believed was mine, but not anymore. That evening, I didn't come down for dinner. Amanda left a plate at the top of the stairs. I didn't touch it. I wasn't hungry, not for food, not for their version of kindness. Instead, I pulled out a dusty file box I'd kept tucked beneath the bed. Inside were old receipts, property documents, letters from Daniel when he was younger, and there, among them, a folder labeled House 2012. I opened it slowly, carefully, like it might bite, and when I saw what was inside, the deed, the payment logs, the notarized letter, my hands began to steady. For the first time in weeks, I felt a different kind of tremor inside me. Not grief, not sadness, something closer to resolve. The folder was thick, heavier than I remembered, yellowing edges, tabs labeled in my handwriting, careful, neat, the way I used to teach my students to organize their papers. I hadn't opened it in years. There had never been a reason to. But now, in the quiet attic room that no longer felt like mine, I sat cross-legged on the floor and began pulling memories from paper. The first page was a bank statement, dated April 2012, a transfer of $150,000 from my retirement savings to Daniel's joint account. I stared at the number, circled in red ink. 10 years ago, he'd called me in a panic. Their lease had fallen through, Amanda was pregnant with Eli, and the seller for their dream house had moved up the closing date. "Mom, I hate asking, but we're short on the down payment. It's not a gift," he'd said over the phone. "I'll pay you back in full, with interest. I just need to get this locked in now before someone else snatches it up." I hesitated back then, of course. That money had been meant for the quiet years, for travel, for repairs on the old car I no longer drove, for comfort. But Daniel was my only child. He'd never asked for much, and when he added, "We'll put it under your name just until the paperwork clears, for mortgage reasons," I relented. I remembered sitting at the bank, hand trembling as I signed the transfer slip. Daniel had kissed my cheek and called me a lifesaver. Now I turned the page. There it was, the deed. The house title, registered to Margaret L. Whitmore. My name, no co-signers, no secondary owners. Just me. I flipped faster now. Insurance documents, tax records, all listed under my name. For the first 3 years, I'd even paid the property taxes myself, automatically deducted from the same savings account. I had forgotten that part. Or maybe I'd just stopped thinking about it when Daniel took over the payments. He'd told me everything was settled, that refinancing had gone through, that it was all in the system now. But nothing in this folder showed a transfer of ownership. No notarized deed switch, no signature relinquishing the title, no formal sale. I was still, legally, unequivocally, the owner of this house. I sat back, stunned. The house where I had become an invisible guest was mine. My breath caught, not from greed or pride, but from the strange, disorienting sense of how completely I had forgotten this fact, how easily I had let it slip away, buried beneath casseroles and bedtime stories and polite rules posted on the fridge. They never reminded me. Daniel never mentioned it. Amanda certainly had no idea. Or if she did, she was playing a dangerous game. I opened the envelope tucked in the back. the one marked backup copy. Inside was a letter from Daniel, handwritten, dated the same week the sale had gone through. "Mom, thank you for everything. I promise this is just temporary. Once we get the mortgage refi approved in Amanda's name too, we'll fix the paperwork. For now, just hold the title. Just hold the title." I ran my thumb along the edge of the page. The ink had faded slightly, but the words cut clearer now than they ever had. For 10 years, I had trusted that promise. I hadn't needed control. I wanted them to build their life. I didn't care whose name was on the mailbox as long as love lived behind the door. But now, when my grandson was being taught I was just a visitor, when my belongings were being asked to disappear for space, when my own child answered a room full of people by calling me temporary, something shifted. The ground I thought had crumbled beneath me was, in fact, still mine. I had just forgotten to look down. I closed the folder, heart pounding. There was no joy in the discovery, no sense of victory, just a quiet, searing clarity. They had rewritten the story of this house without me, but they had done so on pages that were still legally mine. I stood up and placed the folder gently on the desk. Then I looked around the room with new eyes. This attic wasn't a guest space. It wasn't a favor. It was part of my home, bought with my life's work, my sacrifices, my trust. They had slowly turned me into a stranger in my own house, but I wasn't going to be a silent stranger anymore. The next morning, I made a phone call I hadn't made in years. Arthur Levin had been my family's attorney since before Daniel was born. A quiet man with a gentle voice and a sharp mind. He'd helped my husband and me draft our wills, settle my retirement accounts, and later handle the legal side of Daniel's college funding. After my husband passed, Arthur sent a handwritten condolence letter and told me, "If you ever need anything, you call me, no matter how small." It had taken me a decade to take him up on that offer again. When I told him what I'd found, the deed, the letter, the unresolved ownership, he listened without interruption. Then he said simply, "Send me everything. I'll look into it." By noon, I had scanned and emailed the folder's contents. 40 minutes later, he called me back. "Margaret," he said, his voice calm, "you're still the legal owner. Full title. There's no record of transfer, no quitclaim deed, nothing filed with the county registrar. The house is yours, legally and unequivocally." I leaned against the window frame, staring out over the backyard where Eli was chasing bubbles with Amanda. "What about the mortgage?" I asked. "There's a lien, yes, but the loan was secured under your name. Payments are being made from a joint account tied to Daniel, but that doesn't change ownership. It just means he's been paying on your behalf, or perhaps with your funds, depending on the account's origin." That part stung. I remembered co-signing on that loan. Daniel had said it was a formality. I'd barely looked at the details. Arthur continued, "Also, I pulled up the property tax history. You paid it the first 3 years. I checked the routing numbers. Then payments started coming from a different source. But that doesn't alter the record. You are, on paper and in fact, the owner of that home." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "And if they tried to change that without your consent?" He didn't hesitate. "They'd have to forge documents, and I'd know." I thanked him, told him I'd be in touch, and hung up. The confirmation felt surreal. Not because I doubted it, but because I'd buried it so far down, convinced myself it no longer mattered. I had let myself believe I was a guest, because they had treated me like one. Now I knew better. The next question burned deeper. Did Amanda know? That afternoon, I waited until she left for her volunteer shift, then carefully searched the hallway cabinet where she kept household paperwork. Inside, neat binders labeled utilities, medical, Eli, school, and one marked property. I flipped it open. Nothing inside mentioned my name. Not a single page, no mortgage summary, no deed, no tax record with my return address. Amanda didn't know. And Daniel? He had never told her. That realization was heavier than any legal document, because now the silence wasn't just neglect. It was choice. He had erased me. Quietly. Deliberately. A slow fade, year after year, until even my legal footprint had been tucked away in a drawer he never opened. I returned the binder to its place, hands steady now. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even angry. Not yet. Just focused. That evening, over dinner, Daniel mentioned they were thinking of converting the guest room into a playroom for Eli. Amanda smiled and added, "He needs more space for his art stuff. We've been tight on storage." I looked down at my plate. The food was bland. "Sounds reasonable," I said. And I meant it, because I wasn't going to fight them for space anymore. I had already taken something more valuable, the truth. After dinner, while Amanda bathed Eli, I pulled Daniel aside. "Can we talk?" I asked. He looked wary. "Sure. Everything okay?" I led him to the back patio. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft purples and pinks, too beautiful for what I was about to say. "I spoke with Arthur Levin," I began. Daniel's expression shifted, confusion, then recognition, then something closer to dread. "I asked him to check the deed." He didn't speak. "You never filed the transfer, Daniel. The house is still in my name." He opened his mouth, then closed it. His shoulders slumped. "Mom, I was going to—" "You were going to what?" I said, voice calm. "Wait until I left? Until it was easier to explain to Amanda? Or were you never going to explain at all?" He rubbed his face. "It just got complicated." 10 years is not a complication," I said. "It's a pattern." Silence stretched between us. "I'm not here to destroy your life," I continued. "I just want you to know that I remember, that I haven't forgotten what I gave, and now, neither have you." He didn't apologize, but he didn't argue either. And for the first time since I'd moved in, I walked back into the house with my head held high, not as a guest, but as the owner. In the days that followed, something inside me shifted. It was subtle, quiet, almost imperceptible, like a temperature drop just before snow. I went about my routines the same as always, making breakfast early, folding laundry neatly, cleaning dishes without being asked. But now, every gesture I made echoed differently in my mind. Every corner I turned in that house felt like a space I had paid for but no longer owned in spirit, because now I saw everything for what it truly was. They hadn't welcomed me into their home. They had placed me into a role, a position, not out of love, but convenience, a financial plug, a living, breathing investment that could cook, babysit, and quietly pay off a past debt without ever demanding credit. Amanda's kindness, all those gentle thank yous, all those offers to let me rest when she didn't want me around, took on new meaning now. They weren't grace, they were diplomacy, meant to keep things calm until the next stage of their plan could be executed. They thought I didn't know, but I did. And I remembered everything. I remembered the way Daniel begged me for help 10 years ago, voice cracking over the phone. "It'll be temporary, Mom. I just need to get my foot in the door. We'll refinance. I'll put your name on anything you want, I swear." But he hadn't. I remembered Amanda at the baby shower hugging me with tears in her eyes and saying, "You saved us. We couldn't have done this without you." They meant every word. Then. But over time, gratitude calcified into entitlement. My help had become an expectation, my presence, an inconvenience. And the tiny upstairs room they'd offered me with such fanfare? It was never a gesture of love. It was payment. A room for the woman who made the house possible, not to live in, but to stay quiet in. The day after I confronted Daniel, I found Amanda reorganizing the pantry. She didn't look up when I entered. "Do you want me to move my teas to another shelf?" I asked, breaking the silence. She paused, still not facing me. "That might be best. Eli's been asking for more snacks and he can't reach the top. Of course he couldn't. He was 4. I moved the tins quietly, noting how my hands no longer shook when she was in the room. Later that evening, while cleaning up the playroom, I found a list in Amanda's handwriting, neat, color-coded, with little bullet points. It was tucked into a notebook near her laptop. It read, Budget. Get updated figures from Daniel House Appraisal. Spring. Talk to Daniel Deaver. Official timeline for Margaret storage options. Attic short-term rental unit. I didn't take a photo. I didn't need to. Because everything was there, in ink. A reminder that this wasn't just a matter of inconvenience. It was logistics. I was being moved like a piece of furniture, discussed in margins, not conversations. Not as a person, but a problem to solve. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling again. Not out of sadness, not even out of anger, but out of clarity. They were planning for a future without me, while still living off the past I had given them. Amanda wanted the house, all of it. She wanted space for Eli to grow, her projects to expand, and no interruptions upstairs. No reminders of who made this possible. She had convinced herself that it was fair, that this was their home, that I was just the add-on they hadn't asked for but tolerated long enough. I thought of all the times she complimented me. Your lasagna is better than any restaurant's. You're so helpful with Eli. I don't know how we'd manage without you. You're a saint for putting up with our chaos. I used to cherish those words. Now I saw them for what they were. Insulation. Padding around the cold truth. I had served my function, and now I was disposable. I started to pull away. I spent more time in my room, stopped offering to help. I waited to be asked. And when I wasn't, I didn't push. I cooked for myself, quietly, during off hours. When Amanda left a note about rearranging the garage to make space, I didn't volunteer. I just watched. And Daniel? He was quieter now, avoided eye contact more often. I could see the guilt in the way he lingered by the stairs, as if wanting to say something but never quite managing to. His silence spoke louder than any apology would have. They had chosen their future, and I was not in it. But what they didn't know, what they had forgotten, was that I still held the foundation. The cold transaction they thought was buried under time and politeness, it was still alive, still binding, still mine. I began my exit the way a teacher packs up her classroom after the last day of school, slowly, deliberately, without fanfare. No announcement, no confrontation, just quiet decisions, one after another, made in the soft hours of the day when no one was looking. There was nothing left to say. Amanda had said enough with her lists, and Daniel had said everything with his silence. So I started planning. I found an old suitcase under the bed, faded blue with a broken zipper that still worked if you pulled it just right. I unfolded it and laid it open like a promise. Into it, I placed only what mattered: my late husband's sweater, a worn photo of Daniel as a child, Eli's drawing of the sun with Grandma written in shaky block letters. The rest, the clothes, the books, the trinkets, could stay. They weren't part of me anymore. They belonged to the role I had played here, and that role was finished. Next, I called Arthur again. I need to update my will, I said. We met the following afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. He listened carefully as I laid out the changes. I wanted to transfer all ownership of the house, the one they lived in, the one I still legally held, to a nonprofit called Homes for Women, a transitional housing program for single mothers and elderly women facing homelessness. I'd read about it years ago and always admired what they did. Now, it felt right. Are you sure? Arthur asked, pen poised. You could sell it. Gift it to someone you trust. I smiled. I trusted once. That was enough. He didn't argue. We drafted the paperwork over 2 days. Arthur insisted on every detail being airtight. The new deed transfer, the updated will, the accompanying letter explaining my decision. Not to punish, but to protect what the house was meant to be. A safe haven for someone who truly needed it. Once everything was notarized, I made copies. I slid them into a large manila envelope, along with a printout of the original wire transfer I'd made to Daniel, the payment logs for the first 3 years of taxes, and the letter Daniel wrote me in 2012 promising to handle everything soon. I addressed it simply, for Daniel and Amanda. The letter inside was written by hand. No anger, no accusations, just the truth. Daniel, when you were born, I made a promise to give you everything I could. Love, time, safety, a home. I honored that promise, even when it meant sacrificing comfort, pride, or certainty. I gave without asking for anything back except for respect. I moved into this house because I thought you wanted me here. I now understand I was mistaken. That's okay. We all outgrow illusions. But I will not be erased. I will not leave quietly without restoring the balance that has been lost here. This house was never a gift. It was an investment I made in your future, and I now choose to pass it forward to someone who will cherish it, not for its walls or its yard, but for the safety it provides. I'm not angry. I'm simply finished. Love, Mom. I sealed the envelope and placed it in my drawer. Then I booked a room at a retirement residence 2 towns over. Nothing fancy, but warm, quiet, and most importantly, mine. A place where I could teach knitting classes, join book clubs, and go to sleep each night knowing I didn't have to shrink myself for anyone. The night before I planned to leave, I stood at the top of the stairs and looked down into the kitchen one last time. Amanda was folding laundry. Daniel was scrolling on his phone. Eli was humming softly, coloring something at the table. None of them looked up. I went back to my room and zipped the suitcase. The next morning, before the sun rose, I wheeled it to the front door and paused. I took the envelope from the drawer, walked quietly into the living room, and left it on the coffee table. Then I walked out. No goodbye. No slamming doors. No performance. Just a quiet exit, the kind that leaves the loudest echo. They returned on a Tuesday afternoon, sunburned and sandy from their 3-day beach getaway. Amanda carried a tote bag overflowing with damp towels and sunscreen bottles. Daniel held Eli, who was half asleep on his shoulder, clutching a plastic bucket filled with shells. The house smelled faintly stale, the way it always did after sitting empty for days. Amanda walked straight into the kitchen, dropped the tote near the table, and called up the stairs. "Margaret, we're back!" Silence. She tried again. "Margaret?" Still nothing. Daniel frowned and glanced up toward the attic. "Maybe she's napping," he said. "She didn't answer my texts this morning either." He set Eli down on the couch and climbed the stairs. The door to my room was slightly ajar. He pushed it open gently. It took him a moment to register the emptiness. The bed was neatly made, the nightstand clear. The quilt was gone. The little cactus I had kept by the window, Clyde, was no longer there. So were the photos, the stack of books, the sewing kit. Only one thing lay on the bed, an envelope. Next to it, placed with quiet intention, was a silver necklace, a delicate chain with a small heart-shaped locket. Inside it had once been a photo of Daniel as a toddler, and on the other side, a tiny pressed flower from my wedding bouquet. I had worn it every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every Christmas. Daniel picked up the envelope and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress barely dipped beneath his weight. Amanda appeared in the doorway. "Is she not here?" He didn't answer. He just handed her the envelope. She opened it with carefully controlled fingers, unfolding the letter first, then the attached documents, a copy of the house deed, the old wire transfer receipt, the updated will. Her face paled as she scanned each page. By the time she reached the letter addressed to both of them, her hand trembled. Eli came bounding up the stairs moments later, holding a seashell. "Grandma, look what I—" He stopped when he saw their faces. "Where's Grandma?" he asked. Amanda turned away. Daniel stood slowly, the locket still in his hand. "She's gone," he said. Eli blinked. "Gone where?" "To live somewhere else." "But no, why?" Neither of them had an answer. Downstairs, the stillness settled like dust. The house, so recently filled with laughter and ocean breeze, now carried a different weight, the kind that lingers in corners, that seeps into the walls. Amanda set the papers down on the dresser. "We have to call someone," she said, her voice tight. "A lawyer. This can't be right." Daniel didn't move. "She's not angry," he said quietly. "She's just done." He turned the locket over in his hand. The clasp had worn down over the years. He remembered buying it for her when he was 8, using allowance money and spare change from the couch cushions. She had cried when he gave it to her, called it the most precious thing I've ever been given. Now it was here, returned without a word, a full circle, a quiet goodbye. He walked back down the stairs, leaving the envelope behind. Amanda stayed in the room, staring at the place where the quilt used to be. In the silence, something shifted. This wasn't just a woman leaving a house. It was a reckoning, a reminder that even the quietest people carry storms inside them. And when they decide to walk away, they don't slam the door. They take the foundation with them. Amanda read the letter again the next morning, this time slowly, deliberately, as if hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something softer, something more convenient. But they didn't. Daniel sat across from her at the kitchen table, the locket resting silently between them like a witness. He hadn't touched his coffee, neither had she. Eli was still asleep upstairs, and for once the house felt too quiet. No footsteps above, no gentle hum of Margaret's early morning kettle, no soft clatter of cups being stacked. Amanda picked up the letter, her voice steady at first as she began reading aloud. "Daniel and Amanda," it started, "by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not out of spite, not out of drama, but out of love for myself." Amanda's lips trembled. She cleared her throat and kept reading. "I want to begin with numbers, since they seem to speak louder than memories these days. In April 2012, I transferred $150,000 from my retirement savings into Daniel's account, the down payment for this house. At the time, Daniel assured me it was temporary, that I'd remain on the deed just for paperwork, that we'd sort everything out later. We never did." Daniel's eyes fell to the table. His fingers clenched, then relaxed. "For the first 3 years, I paid the property taxes. Quietly, willingly. Because I believed in investing in family. I didn't keep score, but I did keep receipts. Not because I expected repayment, but because I believed you deserved to know the truth when you were ready to face it." Amanda stopped. She stared out the window where the morning sun was rising over the fence. "She kept everything," she said, barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't respond. She continued reading. "This house has never belonged to you, no matter how long you've lived in it. It was mine, legally, fully, completely. And for a time, I was content to let that remain unspoken, because love to me wasn't about leverage. But when love becomes invisible and sacrifice becomes inconvenient, something must be said." Amanda's hand shook now, but she pushed forward. "This is not a punishment. It is a redirection. I have transferred ownership of the house to Homes for Women, a nonprofit that provides shelter for women who have no one else. Because if my own family cannot recognize what has been given freely, then I'd rather give it to strangers who will." Daniel stood abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the tile. He walked to the sink, gripped its edge. His knuckles were white. Amanda looked up at him, the paper still in her hands. "Did you know she still owned it?" He didn't answer. She asked again, sharper this time. "Did you know?" "Yes," he said finally. The silence that followed was immediate and vast. "How long?" Amanda asked. Daniel exhaled. since the beginning. I told her it would be temporary. I meant to fix it. I just didn't." Amanda's voice cracked. "You let me build a life here, raise our son here. You let me believe this was ours." Daniel turned slowly. "I didn't think it would matter. I thought—" "You thought she'd die before it ever came up," Amanda snapped. "Didn't you?" Daniel flinched. Amanda stood now too, pacing. "Do you realize what this means? The house is gone. It's not even in probate. It's legally transferred. There's no way to reverse it." "She gave it away," Daniel murmured. "She gave away our home." Amanda let out a bitter laugh. "No, Daniel, she gave away her home. We were just squatting in it." The words hung in the air, jagged and raw. Amanda dropped the letter onto the table. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. Not yet. "We treated her like an obligation, like noise we tolerated." Daniel didn't deny it. Amanda looked toward the staircase where Eli still slept. "What do we even tell him?" Daniel didn't answer. He picked up the locket from the table, opened it slowly. Inside, the tiny photo of him, baby-faced, smiling, unaware, stared up at him. On the other side, the pressed flower had faded to beige, its petals curled inward like it was trying to disappear. "I didn't think she'd actually leave," he said. Amanda whispered, "She didn't just leave. She disappeared and took the ground under us with her." The letter Margaret left didn't stay within the walls of that house for long. Unbeknownst to Daniel and Amanda, she had given a second copy, along with the documents and a short audio recording, to their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Kessler, with one simple request: "If anything happens to me, or if I disappear, please share this. People should know the truth." Mrs. Kessler, a retired librarian with a knack for technology and a large online following for her community blog, didn't wait long. She published the story 2 days after Margaret left, with names redacted at first. But within hours, users across platforms pieced together the details. The letter went viral. The headline on the post read, "A mother built her son's home. 10 years later, he called her a guest." Within 24 hours, the post had over 500,000 shares. News sites picked it up. Forums exploded with debate. Thousands of commenters weighed in. Many were elderly women who shared eerily similar experiences. "This could be my story. I was told I was just staying until things settled, too. She's braver than I could ever be." By the end of the week, Margaret's letter was being read aloud on morning talk shows. A viral TikTok account with over 3 million followers dramatized the story using AI voiceover. One clip of the line, "If my own family cannot recognize what has been given freely, then I'd rather give it to strangers who will receive 2.8 million likes alone." But the most direct impact came fast and close to home. Daniel's employer, a tech firm that prided itself on family-first values, requested a meeting. The head of HR had seen the viral post and connected the dots. Though no names were used, Daniel's identity was uncovered in the comments by a former colleague who had visited his home and recognized the address. Within 48 hours, Daniel was placed on indefinite leave. The company released a public statement emphasizing their zero-tolerance policy for ethical violations and abuse of vulnerable populations, including elderly family members. Daniel didn't try to fight it. He couldn't. His inbox was flooded with hate mail. His phone buzzed constantly with unknown numbers. Amanda deleted all her social media accounts after receiving hundreds of messages, most of them calling her entitled, a parasite, or worse. But the fallout didn't stop there. An anonymous tip, likely fueled by online speculation, was filed with Adult Protective Services. The report accused Amanda of coercive displacement and neglectful treatment of an elder in a dependent living situation. 2 investigators came to the door one morning, badges out, asking questions in calm, practiced tones. Amanda was shaken. "I didn't force her out," she said again and again. "She left on her own." But the investigators weren't just listening for denial, they were documenting patterns. When asked whether Margaret had been provided unrestricted access to household areas, the kitchen, laundry, common spaces, Amanda hesitated. She had her own area, she said finally. Upstairs, she preferred it. And was that preference ever documented by her? They asked. Amanda blinked. No, she said. It was just understood. The next day, she received notice that the investigation was ongoing. Though no charges were filed yet, her name was entered into a state watch list. The nonprofit she worked for quietly removed her from all active projects. Inside the house, the silence grew louder. Eli sensed the change first. The tension, the closed doors, the quickened footsteps. He asked where Grandma went, asked again, then stopped asking altogether. Amanda spent her days pacing. Daniel barely left the bedroom. One morning, the doorbell rang. A reporter stood outside with a microphone, her cameraman behind her. "Would you like to comment on your mother's letter, Mr. Whitmore?" Daniel closed the door without speaking. That night, Amanda sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of untouched mail. She looked up at Daniel and said she didn't even have to raise her voice. Daniel said nothing. She destroyed everything with a letter. Still, he said nothing, because deep down they both knew she hadn't destroyed anything. They had. She just pulled back the curtain and let the world see. The independent living residence was modest, a 2-story brick building with ivy creeping up the sides and large oak trees shading the courtyard. The halls were quiet, the air always faintly scented with lavender and lemon polish. It wasn't luxury, but it was peaceful. And more than anything else, it was mine. My apartment sat on the second floor at the end of the hall, a studio with a bay window and a view of the garden where residents played chess or sipped tea in the afternoons. I filled the space with softness. Bookshelves lined with worn novels, a yellow reading chair, a tea kettle that whistled cheerfully each morning. I hung up old photos, not out of nostalgia, but as proof of life lived, of love given. And in the center of the room, above the mantel, I framed Eli's drawing of the sun, the one where he had once written, Grandma. I joined a small volunteer program almost immediately. Every Tuesday and Thursday, a van of children from underfunded schools came for after-school reading sessions. I taught them the way I once taught Daniel, with patience, songs, and little paper rewards. They called me Miss Margaret. Some hugged me, others were shy, but they all came back. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not for what I could give, not for how little space I could take up, but for who I was. And then, one Tuesday, the past walked through the front door. It started like any other afternoon. I was helping a girl named Tasha sound out words from Green Eggs and Ham when I saw the teacher leading in a new group. Among them, smaller than I remembered but still unmistakable, was Eli. He wore a blue jacket. His hair was longer now. He looked up, scanning the room with mild curiosity until his eyes met mine. We stared at each other for a second too long. Then he blinked and turned away, joining the other kids on the rug. I stood still. My breath caught, not out of shock, but of something deeper, grief in reverse, recognition without welcome. I finished the lesson, my hands steadier than I expected. When it was over, the teacher thanked me, gathered the kids, and filed them out. Eli didn't look back. Later that evening, I asked the program director casually which school had joined us. Pinewood Elementary, she said. New pilot program. Their teacher said some of the kids had heard about a cool reading grandma here. I smiled politely, but inside, something sank. He had once called me that. That night, I sat by the window and watched the sun dip below the trees. The garden lights flickered on, casting gold across the pathway. I sipped tea and let the silence settle around me. Not heavy, not lonely, just full. I didn't cry. because I knew Eli was safe. He had his school, his friends, his parents. Even if their choices had led to silence, he had what I'd wanted for him all along: stability, and that had come, in part, from me. He didn't remember that now. Maybe he never would, but I did. And that was enough. Some evenings, I received letters, dozens, then hundreds from strangers who had read my story online, widows, grandmothers, working mothers, and even adult children who had once pushed their parents away. Some wrote to apologize to their own mothers. Others just thanked me for saying what they never could. A few came in person, visitors asking for advice, guidance, even a hug. I gave them all the same thing: honesty and tea. Sometimes people asked if I ever regretted it, giving away the house, walking away from the only family I had left. I always answered the same way: you cannot regret a decision made in truth. You can only mourn the illusion that preceded it. I had lived as a shadow in that house. Now I lived in sunlight. I never intended to become a writer. But after the letter went viral, people began asking for more. More thoughts, more truth, more of the quiet fire that had surprised even me. So I started a blog. I called it The Second Chapter. At first, it was just an outlet, a place to organize the pieces of myself I'd kept tucked away for too long. Memories, lessons, unspoken confessions. I posted once a week, always in the early morning, with a pot of tea beside me and the world still hushed. One morning, I wrote this: love is not just presence, it's protection, it's respect. The moment I was called a guest in my own sacrifice, I chose to walk away, and I don't regret it. It was short, less than 100 words, but that single post was shared more than anything I'd ever written. Messages poured in from women in their 50s, 60s, 70s. Some were still in homes where they walked on eggshells. Others had left long ago, but never felt justified. You gave me permission, one woman wrote. Permission to say I deserve more than gratitude given in whispers. A younger woman emailed me from another state. Her mother had passed recently, and she had found herself reading my posts late into the night. I didn't realize how much she gave up, she wrote. But I do now. I hope she knows that. The blog grew into something I never expected: a community. People shared their own stories in the comments about daughters-in-law who treated them like nannies, sons who forgot birthdays but remembered to ask for money, families who said thank you through gritted teeth and then pushed their elders into corners. But they also shared victories. A woman named Carol finally sold her house and moved to a senior co-op where she taught watercolor to kids on weekends. Another reader started a support group for grandmothers raising their grandchildren alone. One woman, 72 and recovering from surgery, posted a selfie in front of her RV with the caption, "I'm finally on the road. My kids said I was too old to travel. I say I'm just getting started." I read every comment, every letter, every whisper of freedom, and with each one I felt something settle in me. Not pride, not revenge, peace. Daniel never responded to the letter I left him. No calls, no emails. Amanda never reached out either. I didn't expect them to. Regret takes longer to bloom than anger, and it has deeper roots. I don't know what they told Eli or if they ever explained. I don't ask, but once, several months later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The envelope was unmarked. Inside was a single sheet of paper. She asks about you, sometimes at bedtime. She says your pancakes tasted like magic. No name, no return address, just those words. I folded it gently and placed it inside the locket. Yes, I had kept it. I wore it only on certain days now, not as a symbol of loss, but of continuity. I had learned that love doesn't end where disappointment begins. It simply changes its form. It becomes boundaries. It becomes silence. It becomes wisdom. On the 1-year anniversary of my leaving, I posted a final message on the blog. If you are reading this and you feel small in your own home, If you are waiting for someone to notice you are disappearing, I see you. I see your worth, your effort, your quiet endurance. And I want you to know it's not too late. You are allowed to leave the table where love is no longer being served. That post was shared more than 2 million times, but the number didn't matter. What mattered were the women who walked into the retirement center weeks later with tears in their eyes and stories in their hands. What mattered were the children who now sat around me asking for books, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. What mattered was that I had rewritten the end of my own story, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with truth. Because in the end, we are not what we gave away. We are what we reclaimed.